Greetings from hot, Arizona. Spencer, I gotta admire you. Karsten, I mean. Spencer, not so much. Karsten, you look really intelligent. The bald head, the high forehead, along with the eyebrows, make you look smart. You look like Chaitananda and his teacher, Rudy. It's right to smile because you've got a ready audience of people who are looking for smart people as teachers. Hang around though and you'll lose your mind and you won't be interested in that stuff. But in the meantime, go for it. Good morning, and I guess where most of you are, it's afternoon. For the last 3 weeks, I've been talking about the 4 bodies. The gross body, the subtle body, the causal body, and Turiya, or the supra-causal body. This is terminology used by Sidestepping, which goes back many, many years, at least 1,000 years. And of which you have to understand in order to understand the way Nisargadatta uses his terms. Otherwise, Nisargadatta is very difficult to understand, especially when he makes a distinction between ignorance and knowledge, human existence and the transcendental, the God, and all of these other kinds of terms, how it fits together for him. But Nisargadatta is trying to make a point. Over and over again, he points about how consciousness is not specific to you. It's universal. Every sentient being, from a worm or an amoeba, has consciousness, has sentience, is aware. But there's a part of us, basically in the subtle body, that identifies with certain aspects of the body and of our thinking, our existence as being our human self, our personality. And Nisargadatta and his teacher, Sidestepping, invite you to investigate yourself analytically, to find out where your sense of I lies at, because that's the cornerstone of the mind. That's the central thought of the mind. All other thoughts revolve around the I thought. This is my own experience. This is from my own personal experience as well as from reading Nisargadatta and reading Ramana. And by deeply plunging into yourself by any number of methods, like following the I thought, feeling for the I sensation, and going backwards into the I sense or into the witness, are all techniques to get the mind one-pointed enough so that it can be seen that there is no I. That the I we tend to think ourselves are before awakening is we have this idea that the I thought points to some real I, some essence of ourselves, whether it's a soul or our heart or something like that, that is the essence of our personality and of our existence. And practicing self-inquiry by any of the methods, like following the I thought that Robert teaches and Ramana teaches, sinking backwards into the self, or just resting in oneself, a sense of beingness, done with a pointed mind results in entering the causal body, wherein one forgets the mind. One forgets one's own body. One forgets even consciousness and awareness. And then breaks through into Turiya, which is unity consciousness. Without mind, without thinking, and without a body. This is a kind of complicated sequence. I mean, it's absolutely true. I've lived through this myself. But there are the more simple teachings that are focused more on the process of self-inquiry. Such as Ramana taken at its simplest. And I'll show you here. This is the spiritual teaching of Ramana Maharshi. And this is the first 2 pages. Who am I? The gross body, which is composed of the 7 humors, I am not. The 5 cognitive sense organs, that is, the senses of hearing, touch, sight, taste, and smell, which apprehend their respective objects, sound, touch, color, taste, and odor, I am not. The 5 conative sense organs, the organs of speech, locomotion, grasping, excretion, and procreation, which have as their respective functions speaking, moving, grasping, excreting, and enjoying, I am not. The 5 vital airs, prana, which perform respectively the 5 functions of inbreathing, etc., I am not. Even the mind which thinks, I am not. The nescience too. Nescience, I guess, in this sense means just being aware, which is endowed only with the residual impressions of objects and in which there are no objects and no functionings, I am not. Questioner asks, if I am none of these, then who am I? After negating all of the above mentioned as not this, that awareness which alone remains, that I am. And I guess that awareness would be what is behind even the concept of nescience. The nature of awareness is existence, consciousness, bliss. Question is, when will self-realization, or when will realization of the self be gained? When the world which is what is seen has been removed, there will be realization of the self, which is the seer. When the world which is what is seen has been removed, there will be realization of the self, which is the seer. Now this is really important because this is where Nisargadatta, Siddha Rameshwar, and Ramana come together, and Robert come together. Question, will there not be realization of the self even while the world is there? And in parentheses says, taken as real? The answer is, there will not be. Will there not be realization of the self even while the world is there, or taken as real? There will not be. Why? The seer and the object seen are like the rope and the snake. Just as the knowledge of the rope, which is the substrate, will not arise until the false knowledge of the illusory serpent goes, so the realization of self, which is the substrate, will not be gained unless the belief that the world is real is removed. What happens when we enter the causal body, when the brain freezes up and becomes stupid, is that remembrance of the existence of your body, and the world around you disappears, and you're in a dark space, a space of no thinking, no objects, no mentation whatsoever. Then the question is, when the world which is the object, when will the world which is the object seen be removed? The answer is, when the mind, which is the cause of all cognitions, and if all actions becomes quiescent, the world will disappear. All right. Now this is really important. The causal body is that where everything is forgotten. There's no awareness whatsoever. There's just darkness, and then you're not even aware of the darkness, or you're aware of your own self. On the other side of that is unity consciousness. And in this unity consciousness, there is no body like you observe now in everyday life. There is no external world. And it says the reason is mind creates the external world. Mind creates knowledge of your body. As long as you have this knowledge of this external created by the mind, the unity consciousness cannot be seen, cannot be experienced, cannot be felt. So the mind has to go quiet in order for you to go into Turiya, Satchitananda, unity consciousness, where there's no separation, no division. What is the nature of mind? What is called mind is a wondrous power residing in the self. Now here he switches from talking about Turiya or unity consciousness and calls it the self, that experience, the self. It causes all thoughts to arise. Apart from thoughts, there is no such thing as mind. Therefore, thought is the nature of mind. Apart from thoughts, there is no independent entity called the world. In deep sleep, there are no thoughts and there is no world. In the states of waking and dream, there are thoughts and there is a world also. Just as a spider emits the thread of the web out of itself and again withdraws it into itself, likewise the mind projects the world out of itself and again resolves it into itself. When the mind comes out of the self, that is, when the mind comes out of the causal body, or Turiya, the world appears. Therefore, when the world appears to be real, the self does not appear. And when the self appears real, the world does not appear. Oh, well, when the self appears, shines, the world does not appear. In other words, when you're in Turiya, there's no world, external world. When you're in the external world, you can't see the unity state. You can't be in the unity state. You can't have the unity realization that everything is you. When one persistently inquires into the nature of mind, the mind will end, leaving the self alone as the residue. What is referred to as the self is the Atman. When the mind always exists only in dependence on something gross, it cannot stay alone. It is the mind that is called the subtle body or the soul. So, he defines mind as the subtle body and self as the supracausal body or Turiya. And the dividing line is the causal body, which is that of forgetting the gross body, forgetting the subtle body, and in their so doing, realizing Turiya, the unity consciousness. Going in the other direction, when the one no longer remembers unity consciousness, the mind arises, and with the mind, the entire world. It's Robert talks about this process a lot. He says, watch your body waking up in the morning. Notice the gap consciousness between your first awareness and then your awareness that the rest of the world exists. Doing these kinds of practices, like sitting meditation on the I thought, or tending to your own mind, or doing any number of things, makes your mind steady. Makes your mind subtle, so that it can see little movements that were not seen there before. Movements of energy, movements of thought, movements of emotions. Stopping the emotions, feeling the emotions, getting into the emotions, becoming the emotions. But I try to point out how all of this fits together. However, it is not necessary to understand this in order to be self-realized. All that you have to do is practice self-inquiry. The process of watching for the I thought, where it arises from and where it disappears to, is the way suggested by Robert. Now, this is accomplished by asking yourself, who am I? And you follow that thought downwards. By downwards, I mean down into your heart and finding the emptiness in your heart. If you watch the thoughts arise, most of the time, you won't be able to, well, let's try it a little different way. Let's say, follow the I thought, see where it arises from and where it disappears to. You have to practice watching your mind for a while before you can begin to isolate specific thoughts. It's not something that hasn't practiced self-inquiry can do readily, to find the I thought, let alone from where it arises and to where it sets. But if you just practice looking inwards in meditation, thoughts will be up here and you'll be looking down here into the inner darkness. That inner darkness is seeing the causal body of ignorance, because the I thought arises out of that state, arises out of the causal body, the ignorance body, where nothing is seen, experienced, or tasted, where everything disappears. And the I thought returns to the causal body. And how that appears experientially is that after a period of time of submerging your awareness inside into that inner darkness and that inner space, it opens up, the space opens up, as well as the third eye opens up, so that the inner vacuum, the inner space, the inner void becomes illumined. It's dark, but you can see into it. And after you can start seeing into it, you'll find that just the process of inwardness, of inversion of your attention, your consciousness, slows the mind down. And when the mind slows down, you can begin to watch individual thoughts. You can catch those thoughts. Now, to me, this is how they always appeared, like little clouds. Little dark clouds floating around in that inner space or above my head. So when I thought of I, the concept I, a thought would appear, and I knew that was the I thought. And I would just watch the I thought and see what happens, whether it would move towards me as awareness, or away from me, towards the void. And if it moved towards the void, I'd watch it being gobbled up by the great causal body, by nothingness, you might say. And if I just watched nothingness, the void, the I thought would eventually pop out. And when you become good at this, watching thoughts, especially the I thought, and where it comes from and where it goes, you become well aware of the void. There's a tendency even to want to identify with the void, because the void is so quiet and peaceful that you just want to run into the void and hide there sometimes when the external world gets very upsettable. And like I did one time, after practicing Who Am I in various forms for over a decade, for over 12 years, is when I was taking a shower, I looked for the I thought inside that void inside of me, like I had a million times before, or maybe 300,000 times, I don't know how many times. And I saw there was nothing there, there was just the void. And I realized there was no entity that the I thought pointed to. There was no inner ed musica. What there was an entire vast emptiness inside. And the I thought, in a sense, pointed to this entirety of this vast emptiness, which suddenly I had become. You might say I had been swallowed by the causal body, because the causal body has that aspect of space, which is able to encompass all phenomena, all thoughts. This is what Jan Essman says he's dealing with. Is the causal body and him as Jan are having a mutual go at each other. The emptiness and Jan as a person. So if we continue into the void, parts of us begin melting away. Our personality, aggressiveness, neediness, all of those seem relatively unimportant now. What is important is to be in the void, remain in the void, because the void is cool, it's clear, it's non-moving, it sucks up all emotions and makes them into nothingness. All depression is eaten up. Anxiety is eaten up. Fear is eaten up. However, even love is eaten up. Desire is eaten up. Leaving one with increasing sense of peace and of independence of all that dependence on things of the world. Things of the world can seem to be like holograms, objects but hollow because they're enveloped by space. So in that sense, the world no longer seems real. It seems like a hologram projection. And then we move deeper, past the void, into unity consciousness. Now the world and I are not separate. However, I really don't remember what it was like living in unity consciousness. Even though I was there for about 6 months, but I know that it was hard to function in that state. And after a while, a functional reassertion was there that allowed me to function in the world. A return to normality. A return to existence within my body and the world and of the mind. But I was still aware of emptiness almost all the time, especially when I was quiet and started looking within. The emptiness, the void was always there. Robert was asked at one point in one of the satsangs, Robert, how do you see the world? Is it filled with light? Is it unity consciousness? Is it this or is it that? And Robert said, no, none of that's true. If it were, I couldn't function in the world. I see the world like you do. Only I know that you are consciousness, as am I. All that there is consciousness. There's no world, external world. There's just consciousness dancing around. There are just the internal energies dancing around. It's just thoughts and emotions dancing around. So that's how Ramana and Nisargadatta and Robert and I fit together. The four bodies are really a theory, a metaphor for the way we experience ourselves in the world, depending upon where our center of focus of our attention is. If we get out of the head into the heart area or the gut area, there's so much more space. We feel spaciousness. We feel liberated from being cramped in the head. We feel liberated from being bossed by the mind. And I would also repeat this, what Robert always said. The mind, your mind, is not your friend. In fact, it's your enemy. The more time you try to figure yourself out, or what various states mean, or what various spiritual teachers mean, and you spend thinking, comparing, contrasting, relating to your own experience, as long as you're doing that, you'll never have release. The mind has to slow down and stop. And that's best done by doing self-inquiry and focusing on the I thought. First watching the mind scattered and thinking, coming and going, and then trying to focus on the I thought or the I concept or just the sound I, and watching how difficult it is, because the mind keeps sending in thoughts and trying to distract you. You can think of mind as like Trump. But what you have to obtain is the state that his new, what do they call that? Head of staff, the Marine General, is trying to instill, which is a steadiness. So imagine yourself as essentially Trump, and some part of you is trying to reach a state of steadiness with regard to ignoring the Trump in you and the constant distractions it's throwing your way and taking you away from meditation on the self. Now, what is self? He contrasted the self with mind. When mind is there, self is not. And when self is in the ascendance, mind is not, and therefore the world is not. Because It is the mind that creates the world and creates our sense of our bodies and our personhood. When the mind goes, we can live in Turiya, or we can begin the great causal body of great ignorance where nothing exists, like in deep sleep. In both Turiya and in nothingness of the causal body, there's a great deal of happiness and bliss, even though there's nobody there to experience it at the time. But in retrospect, when we come awake after a good sleep, we can say, I slept well and I feel good. Because that's where natural happiness lies, within Turiya, with the absence of the mind, the absence of your desires and your emotions, the absence of focus on the external world. So, at this point, let's practice a bit of self-inquiry. Get in a position where you feel really relaxed. Turn your attention within. For those who are not used to doing this, probably the easiest place to turn within is into the third eye area, by rolling your eyes upwards and backwards, like this, and imagining yourself looking at a space behind your eyes, about 1 inch behind your eyes and above the eyes, the third eye area. But as soon as you can do that, you'll want to start bringing your attention downwards into the inner imaginal self in the area of the chest and heart, because it's far more spacious and you're not going to strain your eyes by doing that cross-eyed shit. But sometimes that's the only way to get inside your imaginary inner body. Because once your center of attention drops down into your heart, there's an openness of space that makes it easier to accept anything, because you're vast like a cloud, and any kind of individual thing going on in your life, however much of a problem, is just eaten by that cloud, absorbed by that cloud, made easier by that cloud, that infinite space within. And when you're in that inner space, because it is so large and it's so vast, it's easier to separate out thoughts. Instead of them all buzzing around inside your head, one right after another. Resting into your own space gives you a much larger area to observe those thoughts. So they're not crowded like they were before. And they move much less quickly. They can move infinitely slowly once they're inside this large imaginal space inside of you. And when they move so slowly, they don't bother you. They don't even distract you. You're just resting in this infinite space. Your body relaxes. Your mind relaxes. Everything slows down. And you start feeling happier and happier. As a matter of fact, somebody just recently asked what the signs of progress are in a spiritual path. And I guess you could say the signs of progress are feeling increasingly happy. And I don't mean from hour to hour, day to day, but I'm talking about from month to month and year to year. You feel increasingly happy because you're living in a larger space. You're not so crowded into the mind. The mind is just a epiphenomena that doesn't matter much to you. And you have good access to the causal body, which is pure space without any objects in it. Could be called pure consciousness. The world disappears. Your own self disappears. thoughts disappear, the mind disappears. And resting in that for a period of time brings the instantaneous experience of Turiya, of unity consciousness, where there's no longer any separation between Brenda and Brenda's experience of the world, between Mark and Mark's experience of the world. Mark's body doesn't exist anymore. Mark's mind doesn't exist anymore. Just the unity experience that fills all of space with everything, and you are it. So, look within, especially try to look within in the heart area. See if you can find the I thought there anywhere. Now this is a beginner's practice, but it works. Because by so doing, you become well aware of the nature of emptiness within. And recognizing the nature of emptiness is eventually recognizing yourself as being that emptiness, and then you transcend it and you become everything. But you have to go through that emptiness, and emptiness is very satisfying and very inviting. There's a dark, damp emptiness in you that dissolves all of your problems, all of your suffering, all of your negative emotions. And then you become everything. Stillness, experiencing everything, but not as before. Not as an external world and an internal world, but as one world. No longer with chairs and crows and houses, but a single undifferentiated experience with many appearances, changing and changing and changing within that one experience. Now, a lot of people tell me they experience the state on drugs. I'm not sure whether what they experience are what I am experiencing, or they use my words and description to make it fit their experience, and they say, yeah, that's it, because we're communicating here in words, and we're talking about various levels of having attained spiritual experiences, and trying to wrap ourselves around what music is saying, or Robert is saying, or Nisargadatta, in order to explain our own experiences. Now, like Robert, he's 14 and he had a self-realization experience where the vital force exploded in him, and he expanded, infinitely expanding into different worlds, into outer space, encompassing the whole universe. And he was totally changed after that. But he wanted to know what this experience meant. There was enough of the mind left in him that he wanted to know what this experience meant. Hi, Jonah. I haven't seen you in a long, long, long time. So he went first to Joel, whatever his name is, in New York. Joel sent him to Yogananda, and Yogananda sent him to Ramana. As Robert said, he spent 17 years going from teacher to teacher in India to make sure that he had missed nothing in the spiritual search, that if he understood everything. So the mind was still hungry in him to put it all together, what it means. Even for 20 years after he obtained his enlightenment experience, his awakening experience. But so many of us get into spirituality Because we have these kinds of experiences and don't know what they mean. So we start reading books like Osho, or Eckhart Tolle, or Ramana, or Nisargadatta, to get some sort of structure, to have it all fall together as to what these things mean in order for our mind to stop. Because the mind is what creates the anxiety in us that we just don't understand. We have experiences, and we have regular experiences, everyday experiences, and we have spiritual experiences. What do they mean to us, and what portends for the future? So our minds are always engaged in spiritual searching, in ideas, in concepts, and other teachers' words, which keeps us stressed. But when we enter the causal body of forgetfulness, there's no more stress. We enter into great spaciousness, and the spaciousness eats up our external world, our experience of our body, everything. And we become nothingness, not even space. There's no self-awareness whatsoever. It's as if we were asleep, sitting in our chair. The sleep may last 5 minutes, or may last 1 minute, may last half an hour. Some people call this samadhi. This dwelling in forgettingness, of letting everything go. That's why so many teachers say, when you come to me, you have to forget everything, which means entering the causal body and getting the mind to stop and get ready to accept and experience something entirely different, which is unity consciousness. Are there any questions? Welcome, Dia. I consider Dia a co-leader of these satsangs because she balances me out from being a fucking brain to being a totally sentient person of other worlds and of this dimension on a feeling basis. Welcome. We used to run satsangs together, and they were delightful, at least I thought so. Steve Eckhart, remember how he changed? When we gave him Shaktipat, he was never the same again. He became a babbling idiot. All of you can become babbling idiots if you practice hard and follow me. Any questions? Gary, do you have any questions? You seem anxious, so something's going on in you. Let me have it.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Do you have any questions?
I was reading your on your website. You have like your psychoanalysis books that you put up there.
Right.
And I just started reading through those. I just wondered, as you said in the introduction to them briefly, that kind of shortly afterwards that had all become not really relevant anymore or not important to you. I just wondered what happened after that and how much of that you still find relevant or not so.
Let's just say you can safely skip psychoanalysis if you're in a spiritual search. I explored it because I was in psychotherapy for 7 or 8 years, and I got a PhD in psychology, so I was forced to write a master's and a PhD dissertation, and I chose the subject of object-relation psychoanalysis, the British school, because they were aware that the I in a sense, was not an object, but we created an inner object, which we called the self, or I. And they talked about the failures for this self-concept to develop and to not have a solid foundation for our lives. So I found it very interesting. But it can safely be entirely ignored. We can deal with emotions without having a theoretical substructure. A therapist doesn't have to have a theoretical point of view to help us uncover the feelings within us just by listening and being maybe a half a step ahead in terms of directing one's attention, like Carl Rogers states. So you don't need theory at all. Ignore it. It's not worth really exploring. But you might want to explore the British middle school just for the sheer intellectual understanding that it provides of some aspects of ourself. But I can't state strongly enough how it's important to have our own direct understanding of ourselves rather than reading about ourselves through Melanie Klein or Gun Trip. And we can only do that by turning our attention inwards towards our own feelings, towards our own inner states, towards the inner emptiness, towards inner thoughts, and playing with feelings and emotions that bother most people. We play with, and they become our toys. So we can sidestep psychoanalysis altogether. The only thing that is really essential is turning one's attention inside. One of the best ways is doing self-inquiry, looking for the I thought, or finding the I feeling and staying with the I feeling, which has an entirely different result. If you find the I feeling and stay with the I feeling, rather than looking for the I thought with the visual mind, but stay fixed in the feeling of it, it's an entirely different spiritual path, because that leads us to an experience of an explosive realization of the manifest self, of consciousness as ourself. While what Nisargadatta and Ramana are talking about is entirely beyond the human self, beyond the human experience, going beyond to the other side of the divide between the relative world and the spiritual. And to get there, all that you have to do is keep drilling into yourself. Keep drilling into one's own emptiness, one's own feeling of existence, one's own thoughts, but mostly the emptiness and the feeling of sense of presence, that you are a live conscious being, and just sitting there and being there in that. And any kind of inwardness continually kept up for a prolonged period of time will lead to self-realization. Any other questions? Brenda, do you have a question? Want to type it in? Well, there is one chat question, I guess. Sukai says, surely each thought is the I thought. Not at all. Not at all. There are billions of concepts, billions of thoughts, but there's only one I thought. It creates the division between I and thou, between inner and outer. And as such, it's the capstone thought. All other thoughts depend on it. When the I thought is seen to be corrupt, in the sense that there is no I entity that it points to, all other thoughts fall down and become nothingness, and you're free of thoughts. Any other questions? Any criticisms? Mark, share a thought. Chat thought comes up. Brenda said Robert would talk about killing the mind. Could you comment on this? Yeah, but the deliberate act of killing the mind is using the mind to kill the mind. And the way he usually talked about it is not to slap it down, to whenever it rises up to slap it down, but to really slow thinking down. That is, if a thought arose, don't follow it. Don't let it distract you. Turn your attention away, back to whatever you were thinking or whatever you were concentrating on before the distracting thought arose. Suppose you're fixating on the I thought, or perhaps you're focused on the emptiness in you and a thought comes up. What shall I have for dinner? Rather than following that thought, saying, well, we have these 3 microwave meals, or we have some fresh vegetables that I could, etc., etc. And so starts a train of thoughts following that original thought, what's for dinner? What should we have for dinner? And instead, as soon as what's for dinner comes up, you note it, and then you look away and go back to whatever else you were doing. So it's not slapping it down, but what it is attending to each thought as they arise. Note the thought, and then turn it back to your original subject of your meditation, whether it be emptiness or the I thought or the sense of I. Now, it is still not clear to me what the I thought is. Please help explain again. Who says that? Sukai. Sukai, look within yourself and say the word silently. I. Where did that come from? Where did that word I come from? So you look within. I don't see anything. I don't see anything. I feel something here, but I don't see anything. So, since you don't see anything with your mind, but you feel something with your heart, you take a feel for that feeling, and you just focus on that feeling. And then when that odd thought comes up, what shall I have for dinner? You just note it, note that you were distracted, and go back to that I feeling, or the I feeling into your heart. And you do that with all thoughts. What's for lunch? I wonder how Sandra's doing right now. What TV show should I watch tonight? I hope my kid gets over the cold quickly. Just note the thought has risen. For a second, you grab and hold that thought. Then you let it go, release it. You don't follow that thought with a chain of thoughts, which is so easy to do because that's what we mostly do all the time, is chain thinking, and usually not even paying much attention to it. It's background noise. And when we make it foreground, it becomes very complicated to follow. Because suddenly we're aware of it rather than it's being in the background. Being aware of it, happening so close to us, feels disconcerting because we have no control over it, because we haven't learned how to control the thought flow by just focusing on one thing. And when a thought or an emotion or a picture comes up, to just note that as arising, then let go. Once we can begin to do that, note a thought, hold it there, and then let it go without chasing it. We've broken that chain of chasing, and each thought becomes discrete. And now we're able to do this with the I thought. Who am I? Now we have an infinite amount of space to follow that I thought. Who am I? Who am I? And we can feel it, and it's sinking down. And then after a while we can actually see it as a little gray cloud. A little tiny thing, about this big, floating somewhere into us and then disappearing into the inner emptiness. It's absorbed by the causal body. That's what the I thought is. It can't be explained until you have mastered the ability to isolate specific thoughts through practice. By picking a thought or picking an observable within ourselves, such as an emotion, or the breathing, or the sense of I, or some energetic aspect of ourselves, and we focus on it. And when a distraction like a thought or a noise comes up, we note it, hold on to it for a second, and then let it go. And don't let a chain of secondary thoughts follow it, like, well, there's stuff in the kitchen, the refrigerator, there's this, in order to account for eating in the evening. When you can do that, you can isolate the thoughts, then you can really work on where does the I thought arise from and where does it disappear into, and you'll always find it disappears into emptiness and nothingness. Into the emptiness it goes and disappears into the causal body. And from the causal body, it is where it comes out into consciousness, into the subtle body. But it's not something you can explain and grasp immediately without having practiced for a while of slowing the mind down so that it can grasp individual thoughts. Are there any other questions? Three of the attendees here will be living at my house in September. Max at the top for me. I don't know where he is for you, from Austria. Dia from Scotland. And Michael from, I don't know where the fuck Michael is out of. Where are you from, Michael? I know ostensibly you're from California, but I think you're from outer space, really, sometimes. But then at the end of the month, Enrique will be coming here. No, at the end of October from South America. He'll be here for 3 days. And then there have been other people. Oh, yes, there's, what is his name? Kevin. Kevin's a young guy, about 26, and has been coming and visiting me once a week for off and on for several months. He'll be staying here too, probably sometimes during September and October and November. So we have a nucleus for an ashram. And I have a second house now, which is my mother's house. So we can share houses even though they're 6 miles apart. Any other thoughts? Any complaints, Mark? You want to complain? Ken, you want to complain? Sebastian, I don't think I've ever met you before, although I've seen the name around. And Jonah, it's been off and on for years. You've grown a big beard since I last saw you. Well, this seems like a very worthwhile satsang on technique, on method. So I'll get it taped and posted. In the meantime, those that are coming here, I think because there'll be enough people here, we'll impose more order than we had before. We're going to have chanting music playing throughout the day, not all the time, in the house, like in a regular ashram, usually for an hour or so before meals. I think we should have standard meditation periods too. Just so there's, you know, when you have 5 people each going in their own direction, because usually I don't give a shit. I just let things happen as they do, but there are certain things that tend to get out of control, like Michael, when he's given full freedom, and Max, when he's given full freedom. So we're going to clamp them down somewhat into a regiment, not a stiff regiment. I can't stand that myself. But a little time set aside for practice, a time set aside for eating, a time set aside for meditating, working on the I am, and then 2 hours for primetime TV, where I get to watch aliens eating the human race. Dia, do you have any words for us?